Explorers of the Unknown versus Kaiju Foo. A short story written and performed by Jordan Krumbine. One. The red eye leers, blood red bad. No greater evil looms, not in heart of man, nor fang of beast. The darkness, it's lurking deep beneath the feast of fluff. The pothole sat on the far edge of the road, no more than 2 feet from a weed-covered shoulder that sloped down to a narrow creek. There was nothing remarkable about the pothole. The asphalt had collapsed barely an inch, and its total circumference could have been eclipsed by a dinner plate. As unassuming and painfully ordinary as the pothole was, it was the road that would prove to be truly problematic in this story. Or rather, where the road was located. At one end of this particular road was a nuclear power plant that fed the electrical grid of a nearby city. The road wound lazily around the outskirts of the city, and that's where things start to get complicated. At first glance, the city of Greenville looked like your average red, white, and blue, quiet American metropolis. Hot dogs, apple pie, summer music festivals, police violence against people of color, and absolutely no affordable parking options downtown on a Friday night. Totally normal. Except for the unusually high rate of meteorite impacts, and the mysterious large animal attacks, and the gift shop that appeared overnight, and the library vampires, and the dinosaurs, and that one time when a Mongolian army appeared straight out of the 13th century. Viscous ooze. Zombies. Alien werewolves. Bob's Big Thing. Sentient trash cans that battled massive mutant trash monsters. A urinal that transported its user to the Wild West. The city of Greenville was a really weird place. And that didn't bode well for the unassuming pothole. A large box truck trundled down the road. Printed across the side of the truck was the logo of the nuclear power plant. Energize Greenville! Where the first E was a bolt of electricity and the green in Greenville glowed an atomic green. The vehicle drew precipitously close to the penultimate pothole. If it had been anywhere else in the entire world, the truck would have missed the pothole altogether. Or, if it had hit it, the impact would have been insignificant and everybody would carry on eating hot dogs as they tried to find a parking spot downtown. Since this road ran along the outskirts of Greenville, here's what actually happened. The front right tire of the truck caught the edge of the pothole, which caused the truck to just barely tremble. The latch on the rear cargo door rattled and shifted slightly, but didn't come undone. The driver of the truck unconsciously overcompensated for the mild bump and veered farther right, causing the rear tire to hit the pothole straight on. This time, the latch flipped completely, and with nothing holding it down, the rear door rolled up, revealing dozens of 55-gallon drums stacked inside. One particular drum on the second layer rocked gently from the impact, wobbling on its perch atop another drum as if in slow motion. Finally, it came to a silent rest, and the truck trundled onward. The cargo of 55-gallon drums otherwise undisturbed. And then, a spider dropped from the ceiling of the cab right in front of the truck driver's face. It was not a particularly large spider, nor was it dangerous, but it was definitely a spider. 8 eyes, not that the driver could count them, 8 legs, 1 for each eye, a stout thorax, bulging abdomen, and a nearly invisible line of web that anchored the spider to the ceiling. Yes, definitely a spider. And the truck driver hated spiders. From the driver's perspective, he had no idea how large the spider was. It was tiny. Nor could he comprehend how dangerous the arachnid was. It wasn't. Also, it probably didn't help that some of the other drivers back at the plant had a history of pranking him with giant mutant, albeit rubber, spiders at the most unexpected moments. No matter how often he was pranked, the results were always the same. Unnaturally high-pitched, blood-curdling screams, panicked swatting, kill it with fire. The truck swerved right, and tires bit into the grassy shoulder. A violent swerve to the left as the driver frantically swatted at his face and torso. The astute listener will note that neither the truck driver nor the spider have been named or described in any great detail. This is to spare you from unnecessary emotional attachment in advance of the following traumatic event. You're welcome. Tires squealed against asphalt as the truck swerved again. This time, the forward momentum sent the truck spinning into a violent side roll, slamming into the road. The cargo box exploded in shards of wood and fiberglass. 55-gallon drums went tumbling, rolling up and down the road. As the wreck of the truck skidded to a halt in the middle of the road, the cab resting on its roof, the wide-eyed driver let out a slow breath and relaxed his white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel. His shoulder was sore from the seatbelt that held him in place. His head felt woozy from being upside down. Other than that, he didn't have so much as a scratch on his person. Through the shattered windshield, he saw one of the drums roll into view. As it rotated, the label came into view, and the driver could read the words, "Warning, toxic waste." Before the driver could process his next move, the demon spider crawled across the upside-down visor in the cab. The driver screamed again and flinched violently, waving his arms frantically to brush the spider away. The wild movements rocked the cab of the truck, which in turn knocked loose an already damaged fuel line. The truck blew up. The driver was killed instantly, and so was the spider. The explosion sent a single drum rolling to the edge of the road, down the sloping shoulder, and into the creek, where it hit a rocky outcropping. The cap that sealed the drum's toxic contents popped off from the impact. Glowing green sludge began leaking into the creek, winding its way slowly into the heart of the Greenville suburbs. 2. 3 days later. Downtown Greenville. Plan B was not going well. Air rushed past his ears, drowning out the chaos and destruction happening below. After a moment, Jason couldn't even hear the howling of the wind. It had turned into invisible white noise, a silent soundtrack to his slow-motion fall from the roof of Greenville's tallest building. The Greenville Financial Center stood an impressive 66 stories and just under 1,000 feet tall. Originally, the building was supposed to be 1,001 feet tall, but Martian mole men weakened the ground underneath the base, and the skyscraper had settled a few feet. The architect then tried to add an antenna, but low-flying meteorites kept knocking it off. Now, the only thing getting knocked off the top of the Greenville Financial Center was Jason, the de facto muscle behind Greenville's homegrown group of paranormal investigators, the Explorers of the Unknown. He had been perched atop the building to observe and call shots against a confused and meandering 200-foot-tall ball of white floof that had been affectionately nicknamed Big Bunny Foo-Foo. Plan B was to use the Explorer's proprietary shrink-ray technology on the giant rabbit. It was so obvious, it was stupid. Unfortunately, something went wrong. The 200-foot rabbit exploded into a nearly 400-foot monstrous ball of fur. The newly super-duper sized rabbit had shrieked in agitation and bumped into the Greenville Financial Center, sending Jason tumbling over the ledge and straight into the abject failure of the team's Plan B. It should go without saying that Plan A, no matter the circumstance, basically involved Jason punching things. It cut straight to Jason's philosophical core of punching first, punching some more, punch again, and ask questions later. Or never, maybe? Helpfully, Jason was built to punch things. He was half vampire and possessed all of the strengths that came with vampirism, while suffering none of the weaknesses. Jason did have weaknesses, just not vampire-related. For example, he was helpless against mint chocolate chip ice cream, and it didn't matter how big of a container was in front of him, he had no choice but to consume it all before he could move on to literally anything else. The ice cream was his kryptonite. So Jason tumbled. And as the white noise of air whipping past his ears formed a bubble of silence for his slow-motion plunge, he could feel himself falling, emotionally, deeper into an aimless sense of FOMOOP, which was a lot like FOMO, but more violent. Fear of missing out on punches. As soon as the explorers of the unknown received the call that there was another giant monster terrorizing downtown Greenville, Jason knew his brother would backseat Plan A for some kind of harebrained Rube Goldberg-like scheme, claiming it would make logical sense to shrink the giant monster down to a size that could fit inside a cat carrier. Jason scoffed at his brother's plainly idiotic blunder as he plummeted towards concrete. What an idiot! At the same time, Jason longed for the days when the monsters that plagued their city were normal-sized affairs, like vampires and mole men from Mars. Monsters that went down when he punched them. Back when Plan A still mattered. But now? Dinosaurs. Giant organic alien structures masquerading as multi-level gift shops. Massive clouds of interstellar gas possessed by cosmic demons. A bunny rabbit the size of a small skyscraper. The sense of FOMOOP loomed darker than the asphalt, reaching up to slap Jason across his face, chest, arms, legs. Really, it was going to be a full-body slap, not entirely different from the way an ant is slapped by a shoe. Try as he might, a human-sized punch would have been lost in the giant rabbit's luscious coat of impossibly fluffy white fur. As if to underscore Jason's useless contributions to the current crisis, the voice of the third member of the team chirped in Jason's earpiece. Whoa, wasn't that thing supposed to be getting smaller? Jordan, the alleged brains behind the trio of paranormal investigators, responded from somewhere on the ground. I'm working on it. Can I make a suggestion? Chris? Work faster! Jason could practically hear the sound of his brother's eyes rolling in their sockets. Also, we need more teeth, Chris shouted from whatever buildings he was ping-ponging between. But, bigger! Jason didn't bother to say anything. Why should he? His own team had stuck the knife in his back, back-burnered Plan A, twisted the knife, and now as he neared the end of his fatal fall from the top of the Greenville Financial Center, what did any of it honestly matter? Even after the total failure that was Plan B, it wasn't like Plan A would have made any difference at all. Jason scowled as he fell. The foamoop burned strong. Today, it was a kaiju-sized mutant bunny rabbit that liked to bite the hands of idiot mad scientists. Why do they always have to touch the monster? Instead of the bunny, why couldn't it have been, say, the detached top half of a flying, viscera-sucking succubus, entrails dangling beneath its bifurcated torso? Jason could punch one of those. And it would go down, too. Sure, there might be excessive goop, technical term, or other bodily fluid from the entrails, but he could still punch it. In a final twist of the knife, a perfunctory kick in the metaphorical balls, Jason was spared from certain death as his nearly endless plummet from the top of the Greenville Financial Center finally came to a merciful end. With a whistling thoomph, Jason plunged into the massive white floof that was the rabbit's cotton ball tail. Jason let out a long, frustrated sigh. 3. Jordan cursed under his breath as he hopped off a curb, slid across a random car hood, and pounded pavement towards a sleek black RV with bright green highlights. The vehicle had the word Explorer emblazoned across the side and served as the team's mobile base of operations. It had everything. An artillery of high-tech, non-lethal weapons ranging from shrink-ray rifles to boomerangs. A self-contained network of portable supercomputers running an advanced AI that was constantly calculating the probability of Jason saying something stupid. A comprehensive backup wardrobe for Chris because he always had a hard time finding an outfit to complement his super stretchy abilities. And since Chris had a backup wardrobe, Jason had to have one too. His consisted of multiple copies of the only thing he ever wore: a white t-shirt, jeans, and a leather jacket. None of those things complemented Jason's ponytail, and Jordan and Chris hadn't yet found a good time to bring up this particular detail. The ground shook violently, and Jordan stumbled as he raced to the steps of the Explorer. He tossed a hazardous glance over his shoulder and saw the tips of giant, fluffy ears moving between buildings. The shrink ray should have worked. Years ago, when a Tyrannosaurus Rex had randomly, and unrelatedly, appeared in the suburbs, Jordan was just putting the finishing touches on his shrink ray tech. It handled the Lizard King no problem, and in the years following, Jordan had only made the tech better. He improved the power modulation, fine-tuned the variable fluctuations of the size capacitor, and shrunk what had formerly been a massive gun anchored to an SUV down to a rifle-sized affair. Plus, he gave it a cool red and white paint job because everything looks better in red. Jordan's brain was spinning in circles as he flung open the door and scrambled up the steps of the Explorer. He remembered what the one-armed mad scientist had said. His daughter regularly filled her pet rabbit's water bowl from the stream in their backyard. Toxic waste had been leaking into the water for days. Jordan almost skidded to a halt in the rear cabin of the RV. Behind large, black-framed glasses, his eyes glossed over. The radiation in Big Bunny Fufu's mutant DNA must have reversed the effects of the shrink ray, which meant another blast from the rifle would only make the rabbit grow even larger. But Jordan hissed through his teeth as equations began processing in his head. Big Bunny Fufu's failure to shrink had inadvertently unlocked the other end of the shrink ray equation. Jordan placed the shrink ray rifle on his workbench, reaching for tools and spare parts. His earpiece buzzed as Chris called out to Jason about something. Jordan couldn't pay attention. He was too focused. There was no way the shrink ray would work against Big Bunny Fufu, which meant Chris had been right. They needed more teeth. They needed bigger teeth. 4. Talk to me, Jason! Chris yelled as he swung mere feet off the ground, one arm stretched up and looped around a street lamp, while the other encircled a small gaggle of selfie-snapping pedestrians. Chris had seen Jason fall from the Greenville Financial Center at the same time the pedestrians were trying to take selfies with the 400-foot bunny rabbit that was about to, unwittingly, crush them. Chris chose to save the idiots, knowing full well that the other idiot usually found a way to land on his feet. Except now, Jason wasn't responding on the comms. Yo! Jason! Give me something here, man! Chris set the pedestrians down in relative safety, threw his free hand up to the street lamp, and slingshotted himself into the air. As he began to arc at close to 200 feet, Chris spun weightlessly, limbs flailing, before his hands shot out like the human rubber bands they were and snatched the ledge of a nearby rooftop. The rest of his body snapped after his hands until he tumbled onto the roof, rolling into a crouch. I'm fine, Jason finally growled through the earpiece. Chris let out a silent sigh of relief. But I want the record to reflect that I really hate this plan, Jason said, his voice strangely muffled. There was a series of huffs and grunts which sounded to Chris like Jason was attempting to punch something too fluffy to punch. "Well, then you'll be happy to know we're about to move on to Plan B," Chris said, finger to his earpiece, as he walked over to the one-armed mad scientist and his daughter. "The shrink ray was Plan B!" Chris muted the comms to talk to the one-armed scientist. The man had a lab coat with a dangling sleeve, wiry salt and pepper hair, eyes that were plainly too big for the man's face. He stood with his daughter over a large electronic device the size of a trunk. It was flipped open, revealing displays of information resembling complex waveforms and arrays of dials and switches. 2 radio transmitter dishes were mounted to either side of the device. "Yo, how's it looking?" The empty lab coat sleeve flapped in the air as the scientist waved his stump at Chris to silence him. His other hand danced across the device controls. "One moment, I just need the..." The scientist sounded as crazy as he looked. Chris let his gaze wander to the nylon climbing harness the scientist and his daughter were wearing. The harnesses were strapped to the electronic trunk, and another series of nylon straps anchored the trunk to the roof. Crazy indeed. Chris tapped his earpiece. Jordan, you there? I think we're about ready to try Plan B." "It's not gonna work," Jordan said, his tone flat and distracted. He had already explained in detail why attempting to control the rabbit with sonic brain manipulation was a fool's errand. "The shrink ray was Plan B," Jason repeated through the earpiece, even more exasperated. "The sonic brain manipulator is Plan C!" Chris tried to placate. "Until we have another option, just buy me a few minutes," Jordan said before cutting his comms. Chris shrugged and looked at the scientist. The one-armed man turned a slow gaze up from the now beeping sonic brain manipulation device. The scientist's eyes sparkled with wonder. "It is ready!" Chris stared silently at the crazy, one-armed scientist for what felt like a small eternity. Finally, he gestured at the giant rabbit that loomed over them, shuffling down the street in search of carrots, probably. "Well?" Chris prompted. "Do the thing, then!" The scientist exchanged a look with his daughter and then flipped a switch on the device. Chris felt a strange prickling in the back of his brain as subsonic sound waves began broadcasting from the radio transmitter dishes. One of the rabbit's bunker-sized front paws froze in the air, hanging precipitously over downtown Greenville's lone Big Burger Boys. Inside the fast food restaurant, in the shadow of the rabbit paw, people were scrambling to evacuate. While most trash was left on the tables, some thoughtful customers tossed their trash in the direction of the restaurant's bulky orange trash cans. One particularly considerate man haphazardly hurled a tray at the trash can as he crashed through the window in order to escape the paw of doom. The tray successfully pushed the receptacle flap back, sliding into the trash can and activating a painfully outdated robotic voice. "Thank you, ma'am," the trash can said to the man who had crashed through the window. Above the Big Burger Boys, the giant rabbit's paw hovered for another terrifying moment before slowly changing direction. The restaurant and its binary-operated receptacle compactors were safe. For now. Sadly, the man who had tossed the tray and then crashed through the window to escape certain doom ended up getting crushed as he ran to what he had thought was safety when Big Bunny Foo-Foo backed up. These things happen. The shuffling Big Bunny Foo-Foo turned and lowered its massive head until it was practically on top of the roof the sonic sound waves were being broadcast from. It stared down at the puny-sized human, its nose jittering as it sussed out danger. Whiskers flattened against fluffy cheeks. Giant red eyes narrowed in agitation. Sonic brain-manipulating sound waves pummeled the rabbit. The mad scientist's daughter recognized the look of distress on her pet bunny. "Daddy?" Big Bunny Foo-Foo's jaw dropped open, revealing a saliva-dripping maw. The rabbit let out an ear-splitting scream that sent gobs of thick strands of spit flying, bellowing in rage against the sonic attack. The bunny's roar whipped up a gale-like wind that knocked Chris right off his feet, sending the rubber band man tumbling across the roof and over the opposite ledge. The newly enraged Big Bunny Foo-Foo scoffed, snorted, then turned. The giant rabbit rampaged into the nearest building. The mad scientist and his daughter, as well as the sonic brain manipulation device, remained secured to the roof thanks to those nylon anchors. Unfortunately, they were covered in thick, goopy, mutant bunny saliva. The scientist glanced over at the ledge Chris went over. "No strap," he said. "Some people, they're just born dumb." His daughter frowned at him and pointed at his missing arm. "Do I even have to say it?" 5. Big Bunny Foo-Foo, now angry Bunny Foo-Foo, was doing its best to make sure no one would ever be able to find a parking spot in downtown Greenville again. In a particularly overpowered combo move, Foo-Foo fell forward on its front legs and used the coiled strength in its hind legs to smash kick a building. Windows exploded. Steel girders snapped. Chunks of concrete went flying. Screams of horror floated up from the streets as chaos and destruction rained down. "Plan D! We definitely need a plan D. There is no plan D. The plans only go up to C. No. Plan A is always me, Chris. That makes the shrink ray plan B, the sonic thingy plan C, and whatever Jordan is working up, plan D. Plan A was never going to happen, which makes plan B the de facto plan A. If we had gotten to the bunny early enough, plan A would have worked just fine. What, you mean before that thing got big? You were planning on punching a little girl's normal-sized pet bunny rabbit? Jason scowled obstinately. It still would have worked. Blocks away, a computer inside the Explorer pinged and displayed a message predicting that Jason was going to suggest punching the rabbit before it became a monster. With Jason wrapped in one of his arms, Chris slingshotted through the air. He had to snap his feet out to course correct as the quickly changing landscape was offering fewer rooftops for them to land on. The shift in the wind sent Jason's ponytail whipping right into Chris's face. Dude, come on! Jason was oblivious. But 6. A black and green scooter puttered around smoldering chunks of debris. Jordan pushed the scooter a little faster, hunching over to cut down on wind resistance as he raced into the path of destruction. The modified shrink-ray rifle was slung across his back. A cat carrier was strapped to the seat behind him. Ahead, Big Bunny Fufu smashed into a building, screaming an alien cry of rage. Jordan's earpiece chirped. "Alright, I got eyes on you, Jordan," Jason said. "If the rabbit stays on its current path, you've got about 30 seconds before it gets to you." Copy that. The scooter skidded to a stop, and Jordan scrambled. This was it. Do or die. There were no other plans after this. Jordan unstrapped the cat carrier and jogged it out into the middle of the street. Crouching down, he pulled the latch on the metal grate and swung the door open. A miniaturized Tyrannosaurus Rex took a tentative step onto the asphalt. He looked around, sniffing the air. Satisfied that there was no immediate danger, the T-Rex wasn't exactly known for its intelligence. The tiny dinosaur chirped and stepped forward, affectionately nuzzling Jordan's outstretched hand. Ever since the T-Rex had manifested in the suburbs, yanked out of the late Cretaceous by unspeakable quantities of reality-bending energy, the subsequently shrunken dinosaur had adapted well to the 21st century. An unofficial mascot of the Explorers of the Unknown, George, as Jason had named him shortly after the T-Rex was shrink-rayed, had formed a close bond with Jordan. Now, Jordan ran his fingers over George's greenish-brown, scaly skin. George swung his boxy head and playfully nipped at Jordan's finger. He was gentle and didn't even come close to breaking the skin. A tremor shook the ground, and they both looked up, suddenly alert. All right, little buddy, Jordan said softly. I really hope this works. George chirped something sorrowful as he watched his friend stand and move away. Jordan tried to steel himself. Even though he hoped, better, it still felt like he was sending his best friend to stand in front of a firing squad. As he jogged back to the scooter, Jordan tried to not think about all the adventures and hijinks they had gotten into over the years. He tried to not think about that one time in the dog park when a chihuahua thought it might be a good idea to hump the miniature Tyrannosaurus Rex. He tried to not think about how, after everything ended with Jessica, Jordan's little dino buddy was the only creature in the world that seemed to understand his heartache. Jordan pulled the freshly hacked shrink-ray rifle off his back and tried to not think about how, if he miscalculated the modifications, not only would they have no way to stop Big Bunny Foo-Foo, but his little friend might, probably, get turned inside out. Several 100 feet beyond George, another building exploded, sending a cloud of black smoke rolling towards them. Jordan swallowed hard. They had no other plans. He sighted down the scope. George turned from the explosion and raining debris to look at Jordan. An unmistakable sadness in the dinosaur's eyes. Jordan squeezed the trigger. A blinding blue flash of electric plasma lanced out of the muzzle and raced across the street, slamming violently into the miniature Tyrannosaurus Rex. George reared back in agony as the plasma arced and crackled around him. He let out a mournful cry that echoed against the surrounding buildings. Ozone filled the air, and the hair on Jordan's arms stood on end. His throat tightened as George's cry escalated into something painful. Big Bunny Foo-Foo roared in response. Jordan clenched his teeth, his finger never letting up on the trigger, plasma arcing brilliantly. With his other hand, he reached for the hastily added diameter control dial and twisted it to 5. In an explosion of white and blue and purple energy, the dinosaur exploded in size, expanding under a blanket of crackling plasma until he was a normal-sized Tyrannosaurus Rex, which was still dwarfed by the looming 400-foot kaiju Foo-Foo. If 5 on the diameter control dial meant normal-sized, then 10 should be double. Jordan wasn't entirely sure what turning the dial to 11 would do. With his finger still on the trigger, and George writhing under the impact of the electric plasma, Jordan turned the dial to 11. 7. Chris had launched himself off the rooftop as the bunny drew closer. From his perch on the roof, Jason watched as Jordan executed whatever it was he had cooked up for Plan D. As the street below was bathed in an unnatural electric blue light, Jason's ever-present sense of FOMOOP vanished completely for a brief, blissful moment. As it turned out, unspeakable awe can do that. The tiny Tyrannosaurus that had been nipping at Jason's heels for the last few years suddenly exploded into a massive 300-foot behemoth, towering over Jason's perch and nearly reaching Big Bunny Fufu's impressive height. As the electric glow faded and the crackling energy subsided, the newly minted Gigantus Georgosaurus turned to the mutant rabbit and let out an ear-splitting roar that sounded like a dozen freight trains colliding at once. Jason's jaw fell. "Holy Mother of Malcolm," he breathed. "That is one big bird." 8. Chris bounced off a brick facade before coming to a running stop next to his teammate. Jordan slowly lowered the modified shrink-ray rifle. They stood side by side, both watching as the giant T-Rex squared off against the rampaging mutant bunny rabbit. "What do we do now?" Chris asked. Big Bunny Fufu screamed something wet and manic, gobs of that mutant spittle flying everywhere, its evil red eyes fixed on George. The T-Rex bellowed back, the ground trembling from the sheer volume of the beast's cry. Jordan looked up at his little friend, who was definitely not turned inside out. He felt something tug at his chest as something else pricked at the corner of his eye. Jordan?" Chris asked again. "What do we do?" Jordan nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the Tyrannosaurus Rex that had somehow become his best friend. "Let them fight." This has been an Emergency Creative audio production, written, performed, and produced by Jordan Krumbine. Please like and subscribe for more originals and classics. For more information, visit youtubebooks.com.